So if this is your first time joining us, welcome. This session we design these sessions to be very informal. And one thing I encourage you all to do about halfway through, we'll start tackling any questions you have. So if you have a question for myself or for Mike, there is a questions tab in the top right corner next to the chat tab, and you can submit your questions and vote on your questions there. So feel free to do that. Hi, Mike. How are you?
Good morning, Tim. I'm doing well.
I'm doing good. Good. I'm happy to hear that. So, um, we, I was just realizing we were just talking before we went live, and I realized how little we've had an opportunity to chat one-on-one about things, just our industry or life in general. But I know, I mean, I've been following you for years. You've followed me. We've seen each other at conferences. We always make a point to say hi to each other. So I'm happy to be able to actually like have a conversation with you like this. About e-learning and all of that stuff. So tell everybody a little bit about yourself. What do you do, your history, and how you got into our industry and all of those fun things.
Yeah. So first of all, thanks. It's a treat to be able to sort of dedicate some time and block the world out and the craziness of things. So I appreciate that.
Absolutely.
It's a treat. Personally, so I've always been, even when I was a kid, I've been energized by learning. So I was not the typical kid that said, "Oh, hey, I can't wait to get out of school," because I didn't think school was so bad. I think that learning is such a key element that it's important no matter what you do. I think learning is a critical foundational type thing.
Yeah.
I think when we quit learning, when we stop seeing the need to continue learning, is when we sort of start to stagnate and fall behind.
Mm-hmm.
So, that's one of the cool things I think about this field is doesn't matter what role, what industry, learning is always a central part to that. So when I was a kid, I always expected to be, I thought maybe I would be a teacher or a professor, or, I had no idea that this whole learning and development thing was even a thing.
Yeah.
And, like most people, I kind of got into this field. There was a left-hand turn at some point, and, you're on a path and something changes. I started my first job. I was a programmer. Loved the challenge and the logic piece of it.
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely hated the solitude of just staring at your screen by yourself. So
yeah.
Then I worked for an internet service provider, and this is in very early first days of the web back in the 90s. So
oh wow.
Coding your first web page in Notepad early. That gives you aging myself. Netscape browser and the whole 9 yards.
Yeah.
So anyway, long story short, at some point I realized, hey, this isn't what I really want to do. I was young enough and I just quit. Okay, I had a vacation. I said, I don't want to go back. Kind of quit. Mm-hmm. Started teaching an adult education program at the local vocational school, which then they had a software training component. So I went into software training.
Mm-hmm.
And then from there, sort of followed what seemed to me like a logical path. So I was doing stand-up facilitation and training. Like, oh, okay, well, if I can deliver it, maybe I can design it. So I started doing a little more instructional design. And then, there's this whole online learning thing, and started to play around with that. And then at some point, went back for a master's degree in educational technology, and have been doing some form of that ever since, and am really grateful for that.
Yeah. So you fell into it before you went and got a formal education in it. It sounds like. Yes.
Yeah.
Got it.
Yeah, it was really fascinating. So I got an MBA right after I graduated college.
Yeah.
And then I went back. It was 7 or 8 or so, maybe 10 years later. And my second graduate program was entirely online through San Diego State. And it was a really interesting contrast to see, just a typical in-person versus an entirely online program. And it was fairly early for that kind of stuff.
Yep.
And it was really fantastic. And it sort of confirmed what I had already had sort of an inclination for, was that, hey, this online learning thing is really worth checking out and a valuable. It's going to be a big thing.
Yep.
Even without a pandemic forcing us in that direction. So that sort of set the rest of the course of the things that I've done since.
That's super interesting. I mean, I remember when I was in college, we had online courses, but it wasn't. I mean, really, the very early online courses I remember taking weren't really. I don't even. I hesitate calling them online because it was really just guided self study without a live classroom. It was like read this, answer this discussion question, go read some more stuff. There was no actual like interactivity or even multimedia sometimes. I mean, if it was multimedia, it'd be like, go, watch this YouTube video or anything like that,
Email your Word document to the instructor.
Right. Yeah. It was more just asynchronous self-guided facilitation.
Yeah.
So it's interesting to see how much that's evolved over the years for sure.
And it, at some point, one of the capstone projects that I did was there was an engineering course, introductory freshman engineering course, and they were going to this hybrid model where they had a couple sessions in class, couple sessions online, and it was blended. And I realized that whether you're in person or whether you're online, the instructional approach is really what matters. It doesn't matter how you're delivering it, and that's really central to everything. These poor freshmen. This guy was awful. He was trying to explain some. I think he was explaining variables in the context of programming.
Oh wow!
And I knew what it was, but what he was talking about made no sense. And he just got angry at them for not understanding. And it's like, okay, that's a problem, right? So I'm sure he was a nice guy, but he was not a good instructional. He didn't have good strategies.
Well, I talked about this last week with last week we had Nyla Spooner on, and we were talking about learning experience design and the importance of empathy that goes into being an effective instructor and instructional designer. And one of the things that I've learned is that subject matter experts and a college professor is, I would consider a subject matter expert in whatever they're creating, they're facilitating or teaching. That's the thing that a lot of subject matter experts lack. It's not like human empathy, but they lack the knowledge empathy. They forget that they have such a high level of expertise that they forget what it's like to not know what variables are in engineering, and thus they struggle with explaining it to people who are on the opposite side of that spectrum, right?
Yeah, and I totally agree with that empathy, 1,000%. I think in this field and in most fields in general, right? Like if you have the empathy you're talking about, and then also curiosity, right? Curiosity to, how do I do this better? What's the right way? Like, I think those two things together are like superpowers when it comes to doing what we do.
Yeah, I totally agree. I mean, I think before I got into the world of learning and development, I remember, I don't know if anyone else can relate to this experience or this feeling, but I was always the person in a classroom setting, whatever the classroom setting might be. I could sit there and I could just, this is going to sound woo woo, and I don't mean this literally, but like you could feel the energy of other people when they didn't get something, or you could tell when the teacher wasn't explaining it right. And you could just see it on these people's faces. And I would always be the person who would think, okay, well, I'll sacrifice myself and ask the question, even if I know the answer, because it's going to help clarify it for that person.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And I guess that's kind of the approach. I mean, there's a lot more that goes into learning and instructional design, but that all comes back to empathy, is being able to empathize with the other person and what they're feeling or thinking in that moment, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Could not agree more.
Yeah. So before we talk about some of the free tools that people can use as instructional designers or e-learning designers, I always love to know, like, if you were to go back to, your early days when you fell into teaching and then in instructional design before you realized that was the thing, and then before you went and got your degree in it, I mean, what advice would you give yourself, and what advice would you give others who are trying to get into this industry?
Gosh, that's a great question. What advice? I think the greatest thing that this field has to offer is all the people like yourself and a lot of people probably, watching this is how willing people are to help and share, right? Like, I don't know that there are many, if any, other industries that do that. And I can cite, example after example of somebody's having trouble with something and some person who's done it or solved it or has the expertise. Hey, well, here are my source files, and here, let's jump on a call. And it's just such an open, helpful, amazing community that, one thing I would encourage is, reach out to people. Like, if you're stuck or if you have questions, you need help, reach out. And odds are that you're probably going to find somebody to help in a valuable, meaningful way.
Yeah.
Don't try to do it all yourself, because none of us know what we're doing. We're all just making stuff up as we go along. Some of us are, different experts in different areas, and together we're all better than we are individually.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah, the sum is greater than what is it? The sum equals greater than its. I'm horrible with expressions. You know what I mean, right?
I'm with you.
The sum is something with the parts, but you know what I mean. Yeah, I think that's a really great advice, and I think that stems from the fact that one of the misconceptions, I've talked about this a million times before, but one of the misconceptions about our industry when you're new to it. And when you fall into it, you don't realize that the vast majority of people all fell into it as well. You think you're just this lone, weird black sheep. And I think what makes our industry special is because it's full of people who have empathy. Not everybody has empathy, but the vast majority of us do have that empathy built in. And a lot of us fell into it by accident. There's such a willingness to want to give people the resources that they wish they had when they started, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And that, just knowing that there's other people, even though they may not be in your immediate, office or even city, right? Like, just finding those people and being able to communicate and have conversations. I still remember the first time I went to the Learn chat, the Twitter chat. I thought, oh my God, these are my people.
Yeah.
Like, it was just the best feeling ever. Like, I'll never forget that.
Yeah. Oh, I remember the first time I went to the Learning Solutions Conference. This was in 2010. It was the first time I'd ever gone to a conference. And I remember Nancy Duarte was the keynote speaker. And I was just so happy to meet her. And then I think the thing I remember realizing, that same feeling, like, oh my gosh, these are my people. For me, it was, these are all my people, and they're just like me too. They like, this is going to sound extreme when I say this, but I remember feeling like, oh, none of these people have any idea what they're doing as well. I don't know what I'm doing. They don't know what they're doing. And we're just kind of figuring it out together. And that helped me get over a lot of imposter syndrome that I think I was having working in this industry, for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think I've had that. I've had moments similar to what I think you're talking about at conferences, where you just have this feeling like, I don't want this to end.
Oh yeah.
This is like, I just want this all the time.
Yep, exactly. So, okay, let's talk about free tools. So one of the things for anyone out there who has followed Mike for any amount of time, you do such a great job sharing resources and tools, and you do such a good job out of anybody I can think of that I follow, like curating stuff for people. And gosh, it feels like every couple weeks you share something and I end up bookmarking it because I'm like, oh, there's that cool color tool that I'll use for some reason, or a font tool or a graphic design tool. I'm curious to know, like, how do you come about all of these things? Where do you find all of these amazing free, not always free, but these amazing things that you share with people all the time?
Yeah. So I spend. So every morning I'm up early. I'm up. So everybody, the family and the dogs, everybody's still asleep. So I have time in the morning with, coffee and you usually at least half hour, sometimes an hour if I'm lucky, depending on when everybody starts doing or whatever. So Feedly is what I use to keep up with everything. So it's
Feedly.
Feedly. So instead of going out and checking a bunch of different sites, Feedly lets me subscribe, so the stuff is coming to me. And then the other thing I can do with that is I can sort of organize what do I want to see. So I basically have kind of three big buckets. I have an A list that I want to see. Okay, I want to see this stuff every day. If there's anything new, I want to see it every day. That's a small number.
Yeah.
You're on the list, by the way. You're my A list.
Oh, thank you. I appreciate that.
A B list, which, okay, if I have extra time, I'll get to that. If not, it's okay. I'll get it at some point. And then, the biggest section is everything else. It's just kind of, it's nice to see, but if I don't get to it this week, it's no big deal.
Yeah.
So the combination of having things come to me that I'm opting into by choice, and then being able to organize them in that sort of hierarchy of, what do I want to see when, it's infinitely more efficient to keep up with stuff that way than any other way that I've, can even imagine. So I think the last time I counted, I went and looked, I was keeping up with like 750 or 800 sources.
Oh, wow.
Pretty comfortably, but that doesn't mean I'm reading all 800 every day. It's through that kind of prioritization. And so over the course of the years, it's gotten to be a pretty efficient system for me.
Yeah, I love that. So I'm curious to know, I mean, when I think back to, when I first started, I was using Articulate Studio, and if I needed to buy if I needed a stock photo, really the only option was either take it yourself if you knew how to, or go to like iStock Photo and then buy credits and then tell them how you're going to use the photo, and then the photo is like $800 by the time you're done with it. There were no, I mean, I really have a hard time thinking of, outside of like the Articulate community, there were no resources, or there weren't a lot of resources, free tools, free resources, free places where you can download graphics or images or even videos. None of that existed like 10, 15 years ago, in my experience. Yeah. And so I'm curious to know, do you have any thoughts or opinions on why that's changed? Because I feel like every day there's either a new website like pexels.com or different websites where you can download illustrated graphics and use them for free, and videos. Like, what do you think? What's caused that change or shift?
Yeah. So I think there's two things. I think one is kind of a general, I don't know, you call it democratization of access to things, which includes tools and technology like, okay, iPhones are now pretty darn good cameras and pretty darn good video cameras, and so it's much easier to create them, and I think it's easier to create and easier to share. So now anybody with even basic skills can build a website in a few minutes.
Yep.
It doesn't have to be coded. Like, you can go to any of dozens of website builders, fill in the blanks, and you have a professional looking website. So, I think both sides of the distribution are so much easier now that, if you and I really set our heart to it and really wanted to build a website, we could probably hang up on this call and have something built by the end of the day with tons of photos, right?
Yeah.
And so I think that, access, tools, just everything becoming more easy. The easier it is, the more people who can opt in, and those things take work and stuff, and it's just, I think, accessible to everyone or anyone who wants to do it.
Yeah, I agree with that. I also think, I mean, I don't know if the push towards no code has intersecting with that at all. I mean, I imagine it is. It's less no code, and it's more, you don't need to be a graphic designer to edit and use graphics. You don't have to be a coder to create things that would otherwise require code. And it's less, I think it's become, when I think back to the past, when you'd have to buy, I haven't used iStock Photo in years. I don't know if you still have to buy credits and that whole archaic system of purchasing video graphics from them, or assets. But I feel like we've moved away. It's less about the individual graphic you use, and it's more about what you're doing with it to create something new. I don't know if that makes any sense. It's just, it's not about the individual assets. It's what you're doing with the assets that started to matter more.
Absolutely. Yeah. And then, tools like Canva, right? Like you can build beautiful things, and you don't need to be a graphic designer. So you can take, what may have been a sort of average, boring photo, and then you can plop it into Canva and make something pretty dynamic and attractive. So all of those things are, pushing us in a better direction.
It reminds me of years ago. I think Johnny Ive from Apple said this, or somebody. It might have been somebody else who said this. So I might be misquoting him or misquoting this quote. But it was the quote was, "It's not the best camera is the one you have in your pocket," right? And it was in reference to, like, it's okay if what you use is an iPhone. You can take professional grade photos with your iPhone. And I've used that same analogy to explain graphic design. Like, the best graphic design tool is the one you know how to use, whether that's PowerPoint or Canva or Microsoft Paint. I've seen people do a really interesting graphic design in Microsoft Excel. Even, I probably wouldn't recommend that.
I've seen that. It's very true. And I think there's another great thing. Something you said prompted me of, when people, I don't know if you've ever seen, there's an Ira Glass interview. So Ira Glass from NPR.
Yeah.
And he has this really great, and he talks about, anybody who gets into a creative field like ours, you get into it because you have really good taste and you like these really nice things. But when you first get into it, you don't have the skills and ability to make really nice things.
Yep.
So you have this gap of what you like and what you can make. And it's a really inspirational thing. He says you just have to do a lot of work and get across that gap.
Yep.
And, you will get there, but just don't quit before you get across that gap.
Right. Yeah. It reminds me, there's another quote. I'm not going to remember who it is, but it's a famous graphic designer. And he said, 90% of graphic design is just moving shit on the screen until it looks good. and it's true. I'm just clicking and moving things around until it looks good. The final thing it reminds me of, and then I want to talk about some of the specific tools you like to use. I remember once online, this was years ago, I think it was when Articulate Storyline first came out. There was somebody, I can't remember who it was, they were bashing Storyline because it was such a simple tool, an easy tool to use. And they were Captivate people. And nothing wrong with Captivate. If you're a Captivate person, I don't get you, but that's fine. And I've seen similar rhetoric, if you will, about Rise, that Rise is such a simple tool. It's not a serious tool. And my contention to that was like, well, does it have to be inherently complicated to use to be a serious tool? Because that doesn't make sense to me. And I think it goes back to, like, it's less about the tool you're using and what you're doing with that tool,
Absolutely. I think if you're a good designer with, empathy and creativity and all of the things we've talked about, that you could use, a Sharpie and napkins to design something that's engaging, appealing. And sometimes your constraints of your tools will actually sort of force you to be more creative. So, I've seen things that you would never imagine could be done with, in the old days, Articulate Presenter and the Player and the things that they've done creatively that I would have never come up with until somebody shows me the example. And so totally
yeah
agree.
I mean, my favorite example of that is I used to manage eLearning Uncovered with Diane Elkins, and before we started publishing the eLearning Uncovered books through Adobe InDesign, which is, industry standard for publishing, desktop publishing. All of the books were authored and edited and formatted in PowerPoint. because unlike Microsoft Word, with PowerPoint, you can freely move things on that slide space, whereas Microsoft Word makes it incredibly hard to get outside of the standard word processing format. And it's taking a tool that was never meant to be a desktop publishing tool, but you can totally change a frame, a slide size to the size of a piece of paper and use it as a desktop publishing tool. She has a children's book. It's something, I can't remember the title of it. It has something to do with cows. And the entire book is illustrated using PowerPoint graphics, and you never know that. What'd you say?
I'm a huge PowerPoint fan.
Yeah.
It's so flexible. I've done workbooks and coffee mugs and T-shirts and banners and posters and tons of stuff designing in PowerPoint because it just works and it's flexible and it's easy. And
yep.
I'm a huge PowerPoint fan.
So before we pivot to some of the questions people have, I'm curious to know, like, if you were to list, I'm not going to say 10 because that's a lot, like your top 3 to 5 or more free online tools that people can use for e-learning or instructional design or graphic design. Like, what are your go-to online, it doesn't have to be online, but free tools that you use on a daily basis? I'm curious.
Yeah, so we've mentioned a couple of things already. So Canva I use for tons of stuff. I feel like I'm in there all the time for an infinite number of reasons. So that's one for sure. When it comes to PowerPoint, so PowerPoint's not technically free, but there is an add-in called BrightSlide. Have you used that yet?
No.
You should, as soon as we're done today, go download it and get it.
Okay.
So it's by Bright Carbon.
Oh, I've heard of this, yes.
And it is phenomenal. It simplifies some things that are built into PowerPoint, and it gives you additional features that don't exist in PowerPoint.
Mm-hmm.
So a couple examples, like I use the typography tools all the time. So if you're doing a print project, typography, line spacing, character spacing is pretty important. You can do it in PowerPoint, but what the add-in does is it gives you a little slider and you can see it adjust visually as you work, which is nice.
That's cool.
Gives you, we could be here all day talking about the stuff that it does. It's just really fabulous, and it's free. So if anybody does anything in PowerPoint, I tell everybody, just go get BrightSlide and you'll be grateful. You can thank me later.
Yeah.
So what else? I talked about Feedly. Feedly's kind of how I keep up with everything. Zapier, you mentioned no code earlier.
Yes, I use that all the time.
Zapier is phenomenal. So I kind of the way I explain it, it's like plumbing for the internet. So if I want to take data from a survey form and pass the email to a email subscription, or it lets me connect things like that.
Mm-hmm.
Huge time saver. I think that's going to be a big trend over the next few years of being able to connect tools and apps with each other.
Yep.
In this sort of ecosystem kind of way.
Yep.
So internally, Microsoft has a Power Automate. So if you're behind a firewall,
mm-hmm.
that's all sort of vetted and secure and all that sort of stuff. So doesn't have to be inaccessible if you're in a big corporate environment, which sometimes that's a factor.
Yep.
Airtable. I love Airtable. I don't know if you've done anything in Airtable.
No, I haven't. I mean, I've interacted with Airtables. I haven't had a chance to create anything with it. I do a lot of stuff in Trello, which is another free tool. But tell me a little bit about like what makes Airtable different. I can't, if I were to define it, I couldn't define it to somebody. So tell us as if I've never used Airtable before.
So it's like if you were to go. So spreadsheets are great. Spreadsheets are, they can organize and hold stuff. If you wanted to sort of take advantage of features of database, so here, let me give you an example. So I curate a lot of stuff and I organize a lot of stuff for workshops and for, I teach courses, graduate courses in e-learning, instructional design. So I'm always organizing groups of stuff.
Yep.
And it's really easy to do that in a spreadsheet, but user experience wise, like I hate to browse to, I hate to give that to somebody.
Mm-hmm.
So, Airtable gives me a bunch of different views, a bunch of different ways to present that. There's some really slick no-code tools where I can take rows and columns from Airtable or Google Sheets or whatever, and then I can build these beautiful
Like an app.
sortable, filterable
Yep.
apps or websites. So I get the best of both worlds. I can manage it in a spreadsheet, but present it in this really nice, beautiful, functional website or mobile app. And
Okay.
so it just gives you flexibility to do tons of things. And if you're curious about Airtable, go to Airtable, and they have tons and tons of examples for literally anything, whether it's HR, operations, or marketing, or project management. If you spend a few minutes browsing through there, I'll almost guarantee you'll find something that'll hey, I can use that.
Yeah. Gosh, his name is escaping me. There's this guy. He works at Samsung. Somebody's going to put his name in chat. He's the nicest guy. I see him at conferences all the time. He did a session at Technology where I think he used a tool. Paul, not Enders. It might be Paul Enders. I don't know. His name's Paul. I know his first name's Paul. I'm horrible with names, but he did something. He did a session about how doing a tool like Airtable, where I think he did it with a Google Doc or a Google spreadsheet, and he showed people how to build like a really simple portfolio by putting in links and images, and it created this really cool interactive. It was kind of like this little applet type experience with it, which was really cool.
Yeah, so that's a great example. So I've done an example of something like that. So like for some conference sessions or webinar sort of stuff, I've taken a Google Sheet. So you put things in there, title, description.
Yep.
If you want to put a link to an image, as long as the image is online somewhere. So you can set all that up in the Google Sheet. And then there's a really cool, there's a number of tools like this, but the one I've used is called SpreadSimple.
That sounds familiar.
And what you do, the way it works is you go to SpreadSimple, you sign in, it's free. You can pay for extra features and stuff. But you basically copy and paste your Google Sheet link. And you say, okay, here's where I want my title, and this one's the image cell and all that sort of stuff. And then it builds, you've got choices of different layouts, and it builds a really nice looking website that's interactive. So I can sort it, I can filter it.
Yep.
Like I wouldn't even, if somebody said I had to build that from scratch, I wouldn't even know where to start.
Right. I totally got his name wrong. By the way, it was Owen Holt.
Yeah.
Owen,
yeah.
Yeah.
He's done some cool stuff with Glide too.
Yeah.
The Glide, so Glide builds mobile apps.
That's what it is. Yeah.
Sheets.
Yeah.
And lots of really cool stuff that you can do with that as well.
Yeah, I recently just started using. This is a totally different tool, and I feel like I was living under a rock. Miro. I'd hear people talk about Miro all the time, and then I finally went and I think I was looking for a mind mapping tool, and the one that I had previously been using didn't have any free plans anymore. And then I stumbled across Miro, and it just blew my mind away. Just being such a simple whiteboarding tool. I've used that for project management and creating outlines and all sorts of great stuff.
Yeah, that's a really good one. That's one I've used a little bit, but I wish I was more proficient at, because it can do so much.
It can do a lot, but getting started, and it's just like Airtable, it has all sorts of different use cases that in templates that it presents to you. I use Trello. I mean, Trello is my everyday tool. I keep all my to-do lists for my managing my day is in Trello, and I have, probably like 30 different boards, and I still haven't been required to pay anything, which has amazed me. So I use that all the time.
I love Trello too. It's easy, it works, it's flexible.
Yeah. Good. Okay, well, let's pivot to some of the questions. We have a bunch of questions coming in. So I'll go ahead and read these off. So our first one comes from Alicia. Alicia wants to know, my question is about time and value. How do I know what free tools are worth my time versus cost of tools to save time? I realize that's a big ask. So how do I know what free tools are worth my time. I mean, I don't know if you have thoughts on this, Mike. I mean, for me, it's about I do a lot of like if I could come stumble across a tool, I'll play with it for 10 minutes. And if I can't find the use case for myself, then I say it's not worth my time. But
Yeah.
I don't know. How about you?
Yeah, no, I'm similar. I also, I try so many new tools that it's, it sometimes happens. Or I was like, oh, this is really cool. I'm going to try it out. And I try to sign up. It says email already exists. User already exists. Like I've tried it before and
Yep.
forgot about it. So at that point,
Yep.
it's easy. Like, oh, well, it wasn't anything, so I don't do it again. But I'll, like you, I'll spend a few minutes if something looks interesting. The one thing that will sort of filter that a little bit for me is I might see something really cool and be excited about it, but if it doesn't do something that I need to do, like if it's not a need that I have, okay, well, it's just like another shiny thing. I probably will set that to the side.
Yeah.
But typically, if it's something I think, oh, I can benefit from this, and it could be better than what I already have, sometimes I'll take a look and I'll go in here. I'm like, okay, well, graphic design, for example, you see new ones of those coming along all the time.
Yep.
And ever since Canva has come out, I'll take a look. I'm like, no, it's not as good, so I'm done.
Yeah.
So it's what type of things do I need? Which the things I do are different from you and different from Alicia and whoever. So that's the focusing point for me.
Do you do anything with Adobe XD? And is that a free tool?
It is. Yeah, I believe so.
Okay.
I've done a couple of things in there. That's another one that I wish I had more time to invest in.
So I know it's a prototyping tool. I haven't played with it much.
They've also, in the past few, maybe 6 months, they've also have a presentation building function that they've added, which is really slick.
Okay, I'll have to check that out.
Really nice, yeah.
Good. All right, good. Our next question comes from Rebecca. Hey, Rebecca. Rebecca wants to know, for anyone just starting out in e-learning design, what are the 1 to 2 authoring tools you recommend they start learning first? I have really strong feelings on this, but I'm curious to know yours, Mike, before I give my little spiel about the different authoring tools.
So I think if you're trying to go to make it a career and get jobs, I would look what are people who are hiring looking for. So look at job postings. Mm-hmm. I think the vast majority of those you're going to see the Articulate suite.
Yep.
People I get asked all the time, which one's better, Articulate, Captivate, or whatever. Like they're both, worthy tools. I think the questions you have to ask are, where are you going to get help if you need it, or when something breaks? Not if something breaks, when something breaks. Mm-hmm. And to me, that's Articulate, and the whole community has done such an amazing job. Even if Articulate wasn't as good, just because of the community and the support you can get there, I would go in that direction. Which, so those are sort of some of the things I would say. So I'd say, what's everybody asking for? Personally, I mentioned I'm a big fan of PowerPoint. Mm-hmm. I think I could get pretty close to surviving if somebody said you can't have anything except PowerPoint. I would be okay with that. Yeah, I think the principles, if you can learn some visual design principles, white space and alignment and all that stuff, then the tool becomes irrelevant.
Yeah, I agree with you. And the nice thing, I mean, for me, my opinion is, if I were to list 3 things, it would be storyline. Rise is becoming incredibly more popular, and I don't necessarily believe people need training in Rise. I think it's that learning Rise is more about learning about good e-learning design and instructional design for e-learning, because Rise is so simple. And then Camtasia, like a good video tool. And then everything else beyond that, everything else, when I think of like Microsoft PowerPoint or Word, those sit on the periphery that you're expected to just come baked in. You know what I mean? Like you should know those tools.
I agree, with the exception of the percentage of people who really know how to use them well. Is in my experience very small. Yeah. So using them well filters out. Yeah.
Well, and that's the thing about Rise. I mean, Rise is a really great example where I've come to the conclusion Rise is a super easy tool to use, right? But your point, using it well, like making something instructionally sound in Rise, I actually think is harder because before you know it, it's so easy to create like an interactive PDF. That's essentially what you're creating. It's actually harder to make something instructionally sound in Rise, in my opinion, because it's so simple, right?
Well, and that's, I think it comes back to a point we've touched on a couple of times, right? The underlying fundamentals of why you're doing something is more important than the tools you're using to
Exactly.
how you build it. So, yeah, totally agree with that.
I guess the last bit of advice I'd give Rebecca, and maybe Mike, you might have a different opinion on this, or other people might have a different opinion. Your job descriptions, if you're looking to get into our industry, job descriptions are going to list everything under the sun. They're going to mention SCORM and XAPI and HTML5 and a bunch of things that sound really confusing. I mean, take it from me. I could tell you what SCORM and XAPI is. I know what HTML5 is, but if I needed to write an XAPI statement or edit HTML5 text, like I'd be more likely to be struck by lightning than actually do any of that correct. You don't, just because those job descriptions list all those things doesn't mean you really need to know how to do it. I don't know. What are your thoughts on that, Mike? Because
there's like 0.01% of the people in this field who will go into, the code of any of that stuff.
Yeah.
So, if you know what it is and what it does, the tools generally take care of, the rest of it. You don't really have to know that stuff. There's a certain, level of, being able to troubleshoot things. But as far as being in the weeds and in the depths of code and any of that sort of stuff, that's by far the exception.
I agree. All right, so our next question comes from, and I apologize if I get your name wrong, Inkita. We'll go with that. Inkita wants to know any free tools that can help with creating good quality infographics. I think, Mike, and I'll let you speak to this because it sounds like you've used it more than I have. I think Canva's the tool that I see people using frequently for infographics. Can you speak a little bit about that, or do you have any other thoughts?
Yeah, so there are a bunch of them. Canva is one I use. They have infographics. There are others, Infogram. HubSpot's actually got a bunch of infographics already built in PowerPoint that you can download and use. So, if you just do a Google search for free infographics, you'll come up with a boatload. Infogram, Canva will probably be near the top of that list, and then there will be, a bunch of others. Yeah,
I did discover it's amazing all the things PowerPoint has hidden in plain sight. I think this is available only if you're on Office 365. But if you go to their templates, they have a whole section of templates that are infographic templates that you can edit. They even have, I see all the time, this isn't related to infographics, but if you go insert an image from their online images, they have a whole category of like cutout characters and icons that are there, for free. But if you have PowerPoint, which most people have.
They keep adding to, so there's stock photos they keep adding to. I use those a lot. They've really beefed up their icons set.
Yep.
So I use those a ton.
And it's becoming easier too. If you have a newer version of PowerPoint, you can take a lot of vector graphics, and if you can get it in a SVG format, then you can put that in PowerPoint and edit it just like it were a vector graphic. I do that all the time.
All the time. Take a illustration and break it apart and use the elements.
Yep. Absolutely.
Noun Project is my favorite place for icons.
Yep.
So they come in SVG, you can split them apart and recolor them and do all kinds of cool stuff.
There's one, somebody just shared this in the in my community a few weeks ago. I think it's called StorySet. The icon, it's a storyset.com, and it's similar to the Noun Project. It's all these different icons and illustrations, and you can choose, like an accent color, and it'll recolor it. But you can also, it has different options for animating it, and it'll do these really subtle animations, and you can download them as SVGs or GIFs or video files, and use them in all sorts of different contexts, which is really cool.
Yeah, there's a lot of free illustration sets that are sort of popping up these days. And some of them, like you say, where you can change the style. You want thick lines or thin lines or this
Yep.
color or that color, and you get them in different styles. There's another one called Story Creator,
Oh,
where you
okay.
can create your own scenes. So you just drag elements in, and you can just like custom build
Yep.
stuff. So that's a really, really nice thing to have in your bag of tricks too.
Yeah, it sounds similar to story set. You can choose different like backgrounds, or if they're in the
Yeah,
office or in a medical setting, same thing, right?
right,
Yeah,
right.
I love that. Okay, good. Our next question comes from, and I apologize again if I get your name wrong, Mihaela. We'll go with that. Mihaela wants to know, what tips can you give to someone willing to start a career as an instructional designer? What are some of your tips for just starting as an instructional designer? I think we talked a little bit about that, but if you were to give anything, what would it be, Mike?
Yeah, so I think the first thing is dig into, be curious about what is the research say about learning. So
Mm-hmm.
one of the first places that I would probably start is like, especially if you're doing any online learning stuff, like Mayer's multimedia principles. So don't read the screen on the text, and all of those things. Proximity and cognitive load and those sort of things. I think a lot of the people who get into our field, we have this intuitive sense of what is right. And I
Yeah.
think often that intuition is based on just what we've experienced and what we've had sort of done to us, which in some cases may be okay, and in a lot of cases not so much. And
Mm-hmm.
so, if you have an intuition, go to the research and say, okay, well, does the research support my intuition, or does the research say something counter, and update, your philosophy? I still remember the very first online course I ever built. It was about the water chemistry inside of a power plant. So inside a power plant, there's these water systems that keep everything cool, and it's really complex. Um, and I like, oh my God, this is so boring and dull. I'm going to put in this fun fact, right? Like,
Mm-hmm.
well, that was my intuition, but the research actually says, that's distracting and actually suppresses learning. And so those extra things that people, just jazz it up.
Yeah.
While you
Right.
may have good intent, the learning outcomes are not going to be as good. So
Right.
that'd be a good place to, I think, people should start.
I love that. Yeah, going and validating what you think is true. I mean, we still see it all the time. Learning styles being promoted, and the research does not back that up. But people, intuitively it makes sense. But when you really break it down, clearly it's not a valid learning theory. So I like that. And then the other thing I'll tell people, I mean, the thing I hear from folks is they get overwhelmed with all the things they have to learn, the technology, the terminology, the theory. And the truth is you're always going to be overwhelmed with more things to learn as the nature of our industry changes. And so find the things that excite you and dive into those first. Those are going to be the ones that keep you moving forward. And then once you've mastered that, find something new that excites you. And you don't have to learn everything. Like I said, I don't. People will make you believe that you need to know XAPI and HTML5 and JavaScript to be successful in this industry, and I don't. I like I said, I know what those things are, but I couldn't do any of those things, and that's okay. It's just those are the type of jobs I take on, or the types of clients I take on.
Yeah, that's a thing. Like, if you tell somebody you're an instructional designer, like, that could mean anything of, gosh,
Yeah.
this wide spectrum of jobs, and you
Yep.
could have 25 people who are instructional designers, and no two of them are doing the same thing.
Yep.
One thing I would add to so you're starting out as a career, I think writing is like a superpower.
Mm-hmm.
So whatever you're doing, if you're a great writer, you will always have a place. So that's something that um, I think carries over, no
Yeah.
matter where you're at on that spectrum.
I would put visual design in that as well. Like,
Yeah.
there's always going to be a strong desire to have good visual designers in this industry. That's never going to change either.
And if you
Yeah.
have those two things together, you have really great writing and really great visual design.
Then you're like a unicorn.
You're set.
Yeah. Agreed. Okay. I saw this question. It didn't have the most votes. It's the second one, but I'm going to answer it real quickly. And I don't know if you have any thoughts on this, Mike. Patricia wants to know, I know we're talking about free tools, but I've recently heard about Evolve as an authoring tool. Do you know how it compares to Storyline? Is it better, comparable? I don't know a lot about Evolve. I don't know if you know a lot about Evolve, Mike, but I know Kath Ellis does a lot in Evolve. I would recommend her, but do you have any thoughts on Evolve?
Yeah, I was just going to say the exact same thing you did. I've seen it. I've seen some of the things that Kath has built with it.
Yep.
She's by far and away much more knowledgeable than I am. I've actually wanted to play with it, but the process to get it installed and set up and running is beyond what I've got the capacity for.
Yeah.
So if anybody knows a quick and easy way to get in there and get your hands on something, I would love to know, because I would love to play with it, because I think there's a lot of potential there. I just haven't gotten over that hurdle.
Yeah, I know Kath doesn't have any formal training on it, but I know she's something she wants to work on. But she's definitely a great resource. I don't know anything about the authoring environment or if it's like Storyline at all. Yeah, check.
It's not. It's more web based, right? Like as if you're on a web page, is not slide based.
Got it. Interesting. Okay.
Which it's a trade off.
Yeah. There's another tool. I can't think of it off the top of my head. I'll try to look it up while we finish off. That's similar, but
Adapt maybe.
No, not Adapt. It's I have it bookmarked. Let me open it up and see if I can find the bookmark. I was starting to get ads for this tool, and it's really interesting. It's not an e-learning tool, but what it is they are marketing it towards other marketing people to create interactive marketing websites, if you will, or marketing presentations. But the way I looked at it was like, oh, you could totally create some really cool learning with it. And it's a no-code tool. It's Saros, Ceros. I'll put a link in chat. And there's this one particular demo that they have. Let me put this in chat real quickly. This is going to take you to the full link of this demo. It's Saros.
There's a lot of options. I'll lump them into more of content creation tools, especially if you look at sort of quote unquote marketing tools.
Mm-hmm.
There are probably thousands of options, and that's something else that I think L&D people can sort of look to our marketing friends, and there's a lot of things, including tools, that you can borrow or steal from them.
I would encourage everyone to check out this one. I haven't had a chance to play with it, but they make it. It's no code required. It's digital content. It's interactive, and they have all sorts of different use cases, like interactive annual reports, sales decks, RFPs, interactive quizzes. So it sounds like it's like a Webflow version of interactive educational content.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
And Webflow is another really great one.
Webflow is a good tool. I will tell you, I don't know if you've played with Webflow, Mike. When I was designing the eLearning Designers Academy website, I originally started with WordPress, but then I thought, no, let me try a different tool. I tried really hard with Webflow, and it's a great tool, and they have amazing educational content out there on it. But you really do need to know how to think like a web developer or web designer to use it well, which was more than I was willing to do at that time. So
right.
Yeah.
Well, that's another point about any tool, right? Is finding what's the right personal balancing point for you between what it can do, what your technical skills are, what you have time to get up the learning curve, right? Like that balance point's different for everybody.
Yeah, it made me realize that no code doesn't mean easy.
Right.
Those are not mutually exclusive.
Right. Absolutely.
Yeah. Okay, I think we have time for one more question, then we'll wrap up here. Let me look. I'm gonna try to pick one that we haven't touched on before. Mm-hmm. Okay, we're just going to do this one at the top. Okay, so Lindsay wants to know, for someone who has been an instructor. Sorry, I was reading instructional designer. For someone who has been an instructor designing their own course, how should I begin to transition to designing for others? What backend systems should I begin to learn? So if you've been designing Your own course. I think the question is, how do you start designing for other people? The way I interpret that, and I'm curious your take on this, Mike. When I first got into learning instructional design, I had the really great benefit of being my own subject matter expert. I used to catch shoplifters, and I had to create training on how to catch shoplifters,
Mhm.
and I was incredibly nervous when I finally moved on and I had to create training for other people on topics that I wasn't familiar with. And I think a lot of people suffer from that fear. And I've learned for myself, and I don't know if this is exactly what you're asking, Lindsay, so I apologize, but I've learned for myself that I actually can be a better instructional designer when I don't know anything about the content, because it allows me to go through that transformation of being like my learner, not knowing anything, to knowing something about it. And that transformation gives me that much more empathy to do that same thing for others.
I
I don't
am
know.
glad
What
to
do
hear
you?
you say that. I totally glad to hear you say that because I say that often, and
Yeah.
I think there's a miss in a lot of job postings is they want these people to do training who are 20 years experience in these fields, and I
Yeah.
think it actually can be a benefit in some time. So if I'm designing for new people, novice learners, and I'm a novice myself, I'm
Yep.
going to have a lot of the similar. I'm going to have a similar lens to ask the questions. You know, they say experts forget 70% of the stuff
Mm-hmm.
because they just know so much. They forget what they know, and they forget what new people to a topic don't know.
Yep.
And so yeah, I agree with that
It changes the way
wholeheartedly.
it changes what questions you ask the subject matter expert. It changes it for you not knowing anything and then asking them questions require it forces them to like pull them down deep into the weeds and get into the nitty gritty when you don't know anything about it. And so I don't know. I find that to be incredibly helpful, not knowing anything.
And I think it also highlights a point of back to empathy again, understanding your
Yep.
audience. So somebody who's a novice learns and needs different learning material that's drastically different than somebody who's an expert.
Exactly.
Right?
Yeah.
Experts are much more self-sufficient, but and vice versa. And so understanding that dynamic is important as well.
Yeah, I agree. Okay, good. So before we wrap up, a couple of links I'm going to put in chat for everybody. So first, feel free to join us inside the eLearning Designers community. It's completely free. It's just a small place for other eLearning designers. We do Feedback Fridays, and we do these monthly challenges and all sorts of good stuff. If you want to check out our full schedule of upcoming eLearning career chats, I put a link to that as well. And then, of course, feel free to check out the eLearning Designers Academy. It's my 8-week cohort program for anyone wanting to learn how to design e-learning, how to storyboard, how to use Storyline, all of that good stuff. Our next cohort is actually open for enrollment right now until next Friday, and that'll be the last one I do this year. So feel free to check that out. Beyond that, thank you so much, Mike, for joining us today. It was a great conversation. Where can people find you if they want to connect with you online?
Yeah, pretty easy to find. So my website is mike-taylor.org. That's where you can plug into my free email that I send every Friday. I share a lot of stuff on Twitter at tmiket and LinkedIn as well. So appreciate the
Awesome.
time, Tim. It's been nice to chat with you.
Yeah, thank you so much for joining me today. And thank you, everyone, for attending, and have a great rest of your day. Bye.